Shaquille O'Neal has 4 NBA championship rings, a Hall of Fame plaque, and a net worth that most people couldn't count to out loud without losing track. But on a Tuesday morning in March 2024, none of that was on his mind. He was sitting alone in a small, cluttered office in Windermere, Florida, staring at a photograph of 2 boys in knockoff sneakers, standing in front of a brick apartment building in Newark, New Jersey, grinning like they owned the world. One of those boys grew up to become one of the most famous human beings on the planet. The other one became a high school gym teacher in Compton, driving a 2017 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper and a scrapbook under his bed filled with newspaper clippings about his brother. For 21 years, completely in secret, Shaquille had been building something for that second boy. Not a trophy, not a donation to a charity that would put his name in a press release. Something worth $16,800,000. Something with a name above the door that had nothing to do with Shaquille O'Neal. And on this Tuesday morning, he picked up his phone and dialed the number saved under one word, brother. It was time. Shaquille O'Neal was sitting alone in his home office in Windermere, Florida. Not the big showroom part of the house that people saw in magazines. Not the trophy room or the arcade or the movie theater that interviewers always wanted to film. The actual office, the small, cluttered, real one, with stacks of business papers on the desk and a half-empty water bottle that had been sitting there since Monday, and a lamp that flickered sometimes when the air conditioning kicked on. He was staring at a photograph. It was old. The kind of old that happens to things that get handled too much and stored too little. The edges were soft. A crease ran down the middle like someone had folded it once, a long time ago, and never quite gotten it flat again. The color had faded to that particular yellow gold that only photographs from the 1980s go. Like the whole decade had been taken in warmer light than the ones that came after. In the photograph, 2 boys stood in front of a low brick apartment building, the kind of building that exists in every American city. Flat-roofed, practical, with metal railings and a parking lot that was more cracks than asphalt. The older boy was maybe 12. He was already large for his age. Long arms, wide shoulders, a physical presence that seemed slightly too big for the frame of the photograph itself. Like he was already outgrowing the world around him. His arm was wrapped tight around the younger boy, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Small, skinny, eyes that seemed too large for his face, dark and wide and taking in everything. Both boys were wearing knockoff sneakers. Both were squinting into the sun. Both were grinning like they owned the entire city of Newark, New Jersey, and everything in it. Shaquille set the photograph down on his desk. He set it down the way you set down something fragile, slowly with both hands, making sure it landed flat, and then he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. The number had been in his phone under the same name for 22 years. Not Jamal, not Jay Washington, not anything formal or safe the way you save a business contact. Just brother. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then the line opened and a voice came through. Familiar, the way very few voices in the world are familiar to a person. The kind of familiar that lives in your bones rather than your memory. Warm, slightly out of breath, like the man had been moving around and grabbed the phone mid-step. Shaq, you good? Shaqui opened his mouth to answer, and then paused for just a half-second. A pause so small that the person on the other end probably didn't notice it. Yeah, he said. I'm good, but I need you to clear your schedule. Next Saturday, the whole day. There was a silence on the other end, not a long one. Just long enough to mean something. Everything okay? Jamal asked. Everything's perfect, Shaquille said. He looked at the photograph on his desk, at the 2 boys in the Newark sun. I just need to show you something. Don't ask questions. Don't make plans. Be ready at 8 in the morning and I'll send a car. The silence again. Slightly longer this time. Shaq, man. Jamal's voice had that tone in it. The cautious one, the one that meant he was already suspicious and already going to say yes. Last time you said that, you flew me to Vegas for 3 days. And I missed my cousin Darnell's wedding. Darnell still brings it up at Thanksgiving. Shaquille laughed. It was his real laugh. Not the television one. Not the one he performed on talk shows and at charity events. But the actual one, which was bigger and less controlled, and had absolutely no interest in being dignified, it filled the small office and bounced off the walls. "This is bigger than Vegas," he said, and then, quieter, with something underneath the words that he wasn't going to explain over the phone. "Just trust me." A pause. "Okay," Jamal said simply. That was all. No more questions. Just, okay. The same word, in the same tone, that he had been saying to Shaquille since they were children. The word that meant, "I don't know what you're doing, but I know who you are, and that's enough for me." 8 o'clock, Shaquille said. 8 o'clock, Jamal confirmed. The call ended. Shaquille put the phone face down on his desk and looked at the photograph for a long time. Jamal O'Neal, Shaquille's brother in every way that counts and 0 ways that are recorded on any legal document, lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on a quiet residential street in Compton, California. The kind of house with a concrete front path and a small yard and a porch light that stayed on until 10. The kind of house where you can hear the neighbors sometimes through the walls, just murmuring life. A dinner. Someone's kid being told for the 3rd time to do their homework. He drove a 2017 Honda Civic, dark blue, with 94,000 miles on it, and a crack in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident in 2021 that he kept telling himself he'd get fixed and never did. The car smelled like a gym bag because there was almost always a gym bag in it. He worked as a physical education teacher and part-time basketball coach at Centennial High School, where he had been for 11 years. He taught 5 classes a day. He ran practice 3 afternoons a week. He knew every one of his students by name, knew which ones had difficult home situations, knew which ones needed to be pushed harder, and which ones needed to be handled gently. He was, by the steady consensus of everyone who had ever worked alongside him, exactly the kind of teacher that schools are always desperate for and never pay enough. He was 45 years old, and he had never been on television, never been in a magazine, never been recognized by a stranger on the street. His life had no spotlight in it, and this was something he had chosen deliberately and protected carefully. He liked it that way. But then every few months the phone would ring, and that enormous familiar voice would come through, and his quiet and carefully arranged life would tilt sideways, always in the most wonderful possible direction, and he would go wherever it pointed him, because he always had. After the call ended, Jamal stood in his kitchen for a moment with the phone still in his hand. Then he walked to the small desk in the corner of his living room, the one with the paper calendar pinned above it, which Shaquille mocked him about every single time it came up. And he found next Saturday square and wrote in it in his clean, careful handwriting, "Shaq." All day. He kept the pen. He went back to what he had been doing, which was grading fitness assessments for his sophomore class, testing whether 15-year-olds could do a certain number of push-ups, which most of them could not, but which most of them had at least tried, which he always counted for something. He graded for an hour. He made dinner. He watched the news. He went to bed at a reasonable time. He did not sleep well, not because he was worried. Worry was not what was keeping him awake, staring at the ceiling of his dark bedroom while the neighborhood outside settled into its nighttime sounds. A car passing, someone's dog, the distant rhythm of music from a block over. It was something else, something harder to name. It was the thing in Shaquille's voice, in all the years Jamal had known him, through childhood and distance and fame and loss, and the particular texture of a friendship that had survived every single thing that time and life and circumstance could throw at it. He had developed a precise and involuntary ability to read what was underneath the words when Shaquille spoke. The television voice, the business voice, the performing voice, the real voice. He knew all of them the way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in for years. And tonight, there had been something underneath the real voice that he could not quite categorize. Not worry, not excitement exactly. Something heavier than excitement. Something more careful, like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time, and was finally, after all that time, almost at the place where he could put it down. Jamal lay in the dark and thought about this. Then, somewhere around midnight, his mind drifted, the way minds do when they are tired but not sleeping, to a memory he had not specifically thought about in a long time, though it was always somewhere in him, the way certain things always are. A summer morning in Newark, a parking lot, a car being loaded. A 12-year-old boy crouching down to put himself at eye level with an 8-year-old who was trying very hard not to look like he was scared. "I'm going to do something big, and when I do, I'm bringing you with me." Jamal closed his eyes. Outside his window, a group of neighborhood kids were shooting hoops under the flickering streetlight across the road. He could hear them, the slap of the ball, the scuffing sneakers. Someone calling out a score in a voice cracking unevenly between boy and man. He listened to them until the light in the room had changed and it was almost morning. He still didn't know what was coming, but he had known since he was 8 years old that when Shaquille O'Neal told you to trust him, you trusted him because of Newark, because of what Newark was, and what it did to people, and what it required of them just to get through an ordinary day. Newark, New Jersey, in the late 1980s was not a city that appeared in travel guides or featured in movies unless the movie needed a backdrop that communicated struggle without explanation. It was a city of working people and empty storefronts and corner churches that stayed full on Sundays, because people needed somewhere to put their hope for the week ahead. It was a city where children learned early, not from lectures or lessons, but simply from watching the adults around them, that the world did not operate on fairness, and that if you wanted anything, you had to build it yourself from whatever happened to be nearby. What was nearby, on Leslie Street in the summer of 1987, was not much. A row of low brick apartment buildings, shoulder to shoulder like tired men on a bench. A corner store run by a man named Mr. Petit who sold loose cigarettes and cold soda and occasionally extended informal credit to families he had known for years. A church 3 blocks over with a broken stained glass window that had been broken since 1984 and repaired with a piece of plywood that everyone had long since stopped noticing. A park with 2 functioning benches and a basketball court where the rim on the far end leaned at an angle that rewarded a specific kind of shot that you could only learn by playing there. And in one of those low brick buildings, in an apartment on the 2nd floor with windows that faced the parking lot, lived the O'Neal family. Josephine O'Neal, Miss Jo to everyone on the block and several blocks beyond, was the kind of woman that neighborhoods produce maybe once in a generation. Not famous, not loud, not the kind of person who announced herself when she walked into a room. She was small and quick and precise, with hands that were always doing something, cooking, fixing, folding, holding, and eyes that saw everything without appearing to look. She had raised her children in that apartment with a combination of absolute love and absolute firmness that left no room for self-pity, but enormous room for dignity. She worked, she prayed, she cooked enough food that there was always extra, which was not an accident but a philosophy. She believed, in a practical and untheoretical way, that the only real response to a hard world was to make the immediate space around you softer for whoever happened to be standing in it. She had been doing this her entire life and she intended to keep doing it. In July of 1987, a moving truck appeared in the parking lot below Miss Jo's window. It was not a professional moving truck. It was a rented cargo van, white, dented along one side, with out-of-state plates from Maryland. It sat in the parking lot for most of a Saturday morning, while a woman made trips back and forth between the van and the apartment 2 doors down, carrying things with the focused efficiency of someone who did not have help and had stopped expecting any. The woman was Dolores Washington. She was 34 years old, medium height, strong in the way that people get strong not from exercise but from necessity, from years of lifting and managing and holding things together through sheer physical insistence. She wore her hair pulled back and she moved quickly, and she did not make eye contact with the neighbors you watched from their windows and doorways. Not because she was friendly, but because she was focused. And because she had learned from experience that too much eye contact from strangers in a new place could cost you energy you didn't have to spare. She had 2 boys. The older one was Marcus, 12 years old, broad-shouldered like his mother, with a watchful and self-contained quality that made him seem older than he was. He carried boxes without being asked and stacked them where his mother pointed, and did not complain. The younger one was Jamal, 8 years old, small for his age in the way that some children are small. Not fragile, just compact, like something that had been made carefully in a limited space. He had enormous dark eyes that catalogued everything around him with a stillness that adults often mistook for shyness, but was actually something closer to precision. He was paying attention. He was always paying attention. While Marcus carried boxes, Jamal sat on the front step of the building, with his knees pulled to his chest, and watched the parking lot and the street beyond it, and the whole new geography of a place he didn't know yet, reading it the way an 8-year-old reads an unfamiliar situation, looking for the edges, looking for the rules, looking for the thing that would tell him whether this place was going to be okay. Miss Joe saw him from her window. She saw the way he sat, the careful stillness of him, the enormous eyes. She recognized it immediately. She had seen it before, in other children, in other parking lots, at other moments, when a family had arrived somewhere new, with not enough of everything except determination. She went to her kitchen. She knocked on Dolores Washington's door at 6 o'clock that evening. She was carrying a large pot with both hands. The pot contained rice and red beans, cooked the way she cooked everything, with patience and seasoning and the specific generosity of someone who had made a policy of always making more than enough. Dolores answered the door with a look that was part exhaustion and part caution, the look of a woman who had been let down enough times to be careful about accepting things from people she didn't know. Miss Joe held out the pot. "You've been moving all day," she said simply. "You don't want to cook tonight." It was not a question or an offer, exactly. It was more like a statement of a fact that also happened to solve a problem. Dolores looked at her for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. They sat at Dolores' kitchen table for 2 hours. The table had 3 chairs, and one of them had a wobbly leg that Dolores apologized for. Miss Joe said she had a wobbly chair, too, and had learned to simply sit still, which worked. They ate the rice and beans off paper plates, because the regular plates were still in a box somewhere, and neither of them felt like finding it. They talked the way certain women talk when they recognize each other quickly and correctly, directly, without the warm-up performance of people who are still deciding whether to trust each other. They talked about Newark, about the neighborhood, about schools and bus routes, and which corner store had the best prices, and which landlord on the block was reasonable, and which one was not. They talked around the edges of why Dolores had come from Baltimore, without going directly to it, which was its own kind of language that both of them spoke fluently. And when Miss Joe left that evening, she had already quietly decided several things. She had decided that this woman and her boys were going to be looked after. She had decided that Jamal Washington, that small, still, enormous-eyed boy, needed somewhere to land. And she had decided that her own 12-year-old son, who was large and loud and full of energy, and needed to learn something about responsibility, was exactly the right person to provide it. What happened next was not a plan. It was not organized or arranged or even particularly conscious. It was just the thing that happens in close communities, when people decide, without making a formal announcement, to include someone. Jamal began appearing at the O'Neill apartment, after school first, then weekends, then dinners, because Miss Joe cooked dinner every evening, and she always made enough, and Jamal's presence at the table became so natural so quickly that its absence would have felt strange. He did homework at their kitchen table. He watched television on their couch. He fell asleep there sometimes on Friday nights, and Miss Joe would put a blanket over him and leave him until morning. Shaquille, for his part, accepted this new arrangement with the complete and total lack of self-consciousness that is only possible in children. Jamal was there. Jamal was younger and smaller and needed looking after. Shaquille was older and large and apparently responsible. These facts arranged themselves into a relationship without any discussion being required. He walked Jamal to school when Marcus couldn't. He stood next to him at the park and taught him the specific angled shot required by the broken rim on the far end of the court. He explained, with great authority and partial accuracy, the unwritten rules of the block. Who to avoid which shortcuts were actually shortcuts, where the good basketball games happened on Saturday afternoons. He was 12 years old, dispensing 12-year-old wisdom, and Jamal received it with complete seriousness, as though it were the most important information in the world, because to an 8-year-old boy in a new city, trying to find his edges and read the rules of an unfamiliar place, it was. There was one evening that neither of them spoke about much, because it was the kind of evening that gets stored in a person rather than narrated. Dolores Washington got sick in September of that year, a bad flu that took her off her feet for almost a week. Marcus was staying with a relative for those few days. The apartment was quiet and dim, and the refrigerator was nearly empty, and Jamal sat in the living room alone with the specific particular fear of a child who is old enough to understand that something is wrong but too young to know what to do about it. Shaquille knocked on the door. He had a plate of food from his mother's kitchen, rice and beans again because that was what there was, and he sat down on the couch next to Jamal, and they watched television together without talking very much. And at some point Shaquille said, in the direct and uncomplicated way of a 12-year-old who has not yet learned to dress up hard truths, "She's going to be fine. My mom says so, and my mom knows." Jamal looked at him. "You sure?" he said. "My mom doesn't get things wrong," Shaquille said. This was said with absolute confidence, the way children speak about their mothers when they have earned it. Jamal thought about this. "Okay," he said. They watched television until Jamal fell asleep sitting up, and Shaquille stayed until he did, because he had decided, without anyone telling him to, that leaving before that would have been wrong. In 1989, everything changed. Shaquille O'Neal, 17 years old, 6 feet 10 inches tall, already one of the most talked about young basketball players in the country, was recruited to play at Louisiana State University. He was leaving Newark. He was leaving the apartment on Leslie Street, and the broken rim at the park, and the corner store, and the church with the plywood window. He was leaving Jamal. The morning he left, the bags were loaded into a car, while the parking lot filled slowly with neighbors who had come to send him off. Miss Jo cried and refused to admit she was crying. Various adults shook his hand and clapped his back and said things about pride and potential, and remembering where you came from. Jamal stood apart from all of it. He stood at the edge of the parking lot in his school clothes. It was a Wednesday. There was school. And he watched with those enormous careful eyes, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he absolutely did not cry. Shaquille came to him last. He walked across the parking lot and crouched down. Already this required significant effort, given the height difference. But he did it, getting himself level, looking directly at the 10-year-old in front of him. "I'm going to do something big," he said. "No preamble, no softening, just the thing itself. And when I do, I'm bringing you with me. You hear me?" Jamal looked back at him. "Say it," Shaquille said. "I hear you," Jamal said, quietly, clearly, like a promise being received. "Good." Shaquille stood. He ruffled Jamal's hair once, the only soft thing in an otherwise very direct goodbye, and walked to the car. At the door, he turned back. He pointed at Jamal across the parking lot. Jamal pointed back. The car pulled away. Jamal stood in the parking lot and watched it go, and he stood there for a while, after it had turned the corner and disappeared, in the particular stillness of someone who is already deciding to believe in something they cannot yet see. The years did what years do. They moved fast and carried more change than anyone budgets for. Shaquille went to LSU and became a phenomenon. Newspapers, television, the full machinery of American sports attention turning its enormous lens toward this young man from Newark, who seemed to do things on a basketball court that the human body was not previously known to be capable of. He was drafted first overall in 1992 by the Orlando Magic. He became famous in the total and unavoidable way that very few people become famous. Jamal watched every game he could reach. He stayed at the O'Neal apartment through his teenage years, with Miss Jo feeding him and checking his homework and treating him, in every practical sense, as her own. He finished high school. He went to Cal State Dominguez Hills on a partial academic scholarship and studied physical education. He graduated in 2001. He moved to Compton. He got a job at Centennial High School. He kept a scrapbook. This was the embarrassing and completely sincere truth of it. An actual physical scrapbook, purchased from a drugstore, filled with newspaper clippings and printed photographs and game day programs, and a copy of the Sports Illustrated cover from 1992 with a 19-year-old Shaquille looking like he had arrived from a slightly larger planet than everyone else. He kept it under his bed in Compton. His students found out occasionally who he was connected to. The news traveled through a high school the way all news does, fast and slightly distorted, and someone would appear in his doorway or stop him in the hallway with the specific, barely controlled excitement of a teenager who has just learned something that seems impossible. "Mr. Washington, is it true you actually know Shaq, like personally?" And Jamal would look at them with that same steady, enormous-eyed calm he had carried since he was 8 years old, standing in a Newark parking lot. "Brothers," he would say quietly, every single time. "Not friends, not yeah, we go way back." Not the casual and non-committal language of someone managing an association. Just brothers. No further explanation, because none was needed. And now it was a Friday night in Compton in March 2024. And tomorrow a black SUV was coming at 8 in the morning. And Jamal Washington lay only on his couch with the television on, and not watched and thought about Newark, and thought about a crouching 17-year-old, and thought about the thing underneath the words in the phone call, and could not have told you with any accuracy what he was feeling. Anticipation, something like it, heavier. The thing you feel when you have spent your whole life trusting someone, and you are about to find out what that trust has been quietly building toward. Outside, the neighborhood kids had long since gone in for the night. The street light across the road flickered its familiar slow flicker. Jamal turned off the television. He went to his bedroom. He reached under the bed and pulled out the scrapbook. He opened it to the first page. A grainy Newark newspaper article from 1989, local teen heads to LSU, with a photograph of Shaquille at 17 looking enormous and slightly surprised by the camera. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put the scrapbook back under the bed, turned off the light, and lay in the dark. "I'm going to do something big, and when I do, I'm bringing you with me." He had been 10 years old. He had believed it immediately. 35 years later, on the night before everything changed, he believed it still. Believed it still. The car arrived at 7:58 a.m. Jamal heard it before he saw it. The quiet, expensive sound of an engine that had nothing to prove, pulling slowly to the curb outside his house. He was already on the porch. He had been on the porch since 7:40, sitting in the plastic chair he kept out there, holding a cup of coffee that had gone from hot to warm to something in between, while he watched the street wake up around him. The car was a black SUV, the kind that said nothing specific and everything general about the person who had sent it. Clean, quiet, windows tinted just enough, no logos, no markings. Just a solid, well-maintained vehicle sitting at his curb like a period at the end of a sentence. The driver stepped out. He was a polite man, somewhere in his 50s, wearing a dark jacket, and the particular expression of someone who had been professionally pleasant for so long that it had become entirely sincere. He walked up the front path without hurrying. "Good morning, Mr. Washington." He held the rear door open. "Mr. O'Neill sends his regards." "Morning," Jamal said. He stood up from the porch chair. He was wearing jeans, clean, dark, his good ones, a gray hoodie, and his best sneakers. The sneakers were New Balance fit, white with a gray stripe, kept in their box, except for occasions that felt like they required something clean and considered. He'd spent a small embarrassing amount of time deciding on the hoodie. He told himself it didn't matter, and then gone back and changed it once anyway. He took a last look at his street. The neighborhood was doing its Saturday morning routine. A man 3 houses down was already washing his car, the soapy water running in thin streams across the driveway. 2 kids were on bicycles at the end of the block, circling slowly with no particular destination. A woman he recognized but didn't know well was walking a small energetic dog that clearly had somewhere important to be. Ordinary, familiar his. He got in the car. "Gerald." "Gerald." He introduced himself as Gerald about 2 minutes into the drive, in the tone of someone providing information rather than beginning a conversation. navigated out of Compton heading north with the smooth economy of a man who had made this kind of drive many times and saw no reason to discuss it. Jamal watched the city shift outside the window. Los Angeles on a Saturday morning has a specific quality that it doesn't have on any other day. Looser than a weekday, less performative than a Sunday. People out earlier than they needed to be. A kind of tentative ease in the way the streets carried traffic. He noted their direction without asking about it. South Bay gave way to Inglewood. He watched for the turn toward LAX, which would mean an airport, which would mean somewhere else entirely. The turn didn't come. They weren't going to Staples Center. He'd stopped calling it that, or tried to, but the new name still felt like wearing someone else's shoes. No game today anyway. He watched, he waited, and then Gerald took a turn that Jamal didn't expect. Not toward anything Jamal would have predicted. Not toward anything that made the pattern of this morning make immediate sense. They were moving through a part of Inglewood that had not been touched by the recent wave of development, that had rebuilt sections of the city around the gleaming new stadium, and the money that followed it. These streets were older, quieter. The buildings here had not been renovated or rebranded. They existed in the patient, unglamorous way that neighborhoods exist when they are waiting for someone to remember they matter. Jamal sat up straighter in his seat. Something was changing in his chest. Not quite recognition. Not yet. More like the feeling you get in the seconds before you recognize something. That preliminary shift, the internal equivalent of a word on the tip of your tongue. The SUV slowed. It did not stop. Gerald had apparently been instructed to slow but not stop, to pass by rather than park, to offer a view rather than an arrival. They were on a wide, sun-beaten street. Jamal looked out the window. The building was low and flat-roofed, set back from the street behind a chain-link fence. The exterior walls had murals painted across them. Faded now, the colors bleached by years of California sun into something softer than they'd started as. Blues that had gone almost gray, reds that had become the color of old brick, a painted basketball, once bright orange, now the color of autumn. The parking lot was empty. The lights were off. In the lot where children had once argued cheerfully about fouls and out-of-bounds calls, there was nothing now but cracked asphalt and a faded rectangle, where a portable scoreboard had once been bolted to the ground. The two basketball hoops out front were still standing, just barely. One of them leaned inward like it was tired. The nets had been gone for a long time. Through the chain-link fence, someone had threaded a hand-lettered sign on red cardboard that had been weathered by rain and sun until the letters had blurred at the edges but could still be read. We miss this place. Jamal stared at it as the SUV moved slowly past. He said nothing. Gerald said nothing. The building slid past the window, and then it was behind them, and Jamal was facing forward again, looking at the road ahead. Gerald, he said after a moment. Yes, sir. I know that building. Yes, sir. Gerald said again, pleasantly, giving away nothing. Jamal turned and looked back through the rear window. He could still see it. The flat roof, the faded murals, the chain-link fence with its handwritten sign. He had walked into that building on a Saturday morning 17 years ago. 22 years old and new to Compton and not knowing anyone. Looking for something useful to do with his weekends. The man at the front desk had been a retired coach named Eddie Purcell who wore the same blue cap every day and asked exactly 2 questions of anyone who came to Venolvlutier. Can you show up on time? And can you be patient with kids who've had a hard week?